one of the toughest degrees to get at K-State. But he should have been in sales, because that guy could talk you into doing some stupid stuff. And he did, and I guarantee you there's a bunch of people in here that know what I'm talking about.
You can about go from Selden on to Jennings, and we've probably walked a majority of that. Road hunted a lot of it. I mean, he loved to hunt. We got into archery hunting too, and so then it turned into road hunting deer. Those outside of northwest Kansas don't know what road hunting, bow hunting deer is, but you can do it. And we did it, sometimes after a few cocktails. But I don't know. I look back at Kurt and never had a dull moment with Kurt. Didn't have to have anything to do. We could just make fun. And it's probably what I look back on Kurt the most. Great friend. I have 5 kids, and I hope that they have a friend like Kurt. She's awesome. That's right.
I did inherit that. I'll just leave it there.
She fixes stuff for him too.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. I inherited a genetic condition from my mother, and sometimes I talk too much. And when I'd be telling Kurt a story, he was always a really good listener. But at some point, he'd say, "Hey, Daner, I got a question for you. What was your favorite part?" Most people just say, "Shut up." That's how I knew, Kurt, I needed to get it over with. So sometime later on Friday, after negotiating a whole bunch of these, that was the first thing that came to my mind was what was my favorite part? That's a pretty tough question. Because there's a lot of good parts, right? So in the end, I decided, my favorite part, and I think most people's favorite part was how much they always laughed around Kurt. Well, I'd never really thought about, why is Kurt funny? He was just funny, But then I had to actually figure it out because I was going to talk about it. So I may be wrong, but I decided that the reason Kurt was so funny was because he had his own language. So I started really trying to figure out, what was funny about that. And that led to this. So I'll just jump in. Kurt had his own dialect. Some of it he got from his brothers, some of it he picked up from Don and other locals in Dresden and Selden and Jennings, and some of it came with the territory from growing up in farm country, and others of it came off Saturday Night Live and Animal House or Taxi or the Married with Children sitcoms. Regardless, behind all those hilarious and witty comments, there was always some sort of history, a story, a situation, a movie, a memorable event, or a person. This Sulzman slang was sort of a blend between Midwestern farmer, dry humor comedian, redneck lingo, a witty professor, and actors like John Belushi and Jim off of Taxi and Al Bundy off of Married with Children. Kurt's language was very flexible. It was utility-like. It was funny. It was informative, it was very practical, and it was multi-purpose. A lot of Kurt's one-liners could have very different meanings depending on the context. Depending on the situation or who he was talking to, or sometimes even how they were pronounced. Sometimes they had so many different meanings that they could be said in response to just about anything. They were just always different enough for most people that they ended up being somewhere between hilarious or funny, or at a minimum, at least, interesting. But for some that didn't really grow up with Kurt or know Kurt that well, or spend a lot of time with him, they were really confusing, especially for women. And, you know, when you'd be standing in that circle and he'd rattle off 4 or 5 of these things, I would always look around because I knew there was going to be a lot of people who had no idea what he was talking about. And people would roll their eyes or stand around like, what the, you know. But there was always 1 or 2 people that knew what was going on, and they were just laughing like crazy. So everybody just laughed. So a few classics to get started with. Scott knows this one better than I do, but Kurt used it for everything. It was probably the first one I remember hearing when I was 13 years old. And it was, "Hey there, Virgil, what you putting on that lure? Chum and rub?" So those that aren't fishermen, Virgil Ward was an all-star bass fisherman in the 80s. And this chum and rub stuff was like a stink bait for bass. You squeeze it out of a tube, you put it on your lure. It was nasty. Kurt used that one-liner for 100 different things. It was always a question, but it didn't have to be about fishing. And I wrote down like 20 bullets that I'm not even going to say, but in the end, the question was, "Hey there, Virgil, what you putting on that lure, chum and rub?" Just for smell. That was another one. And this one's really close to me because I was there the minute that this one got originated. So Kurt, he wasn't always a ladies' man exactly. He was more of an Al Bundy. But I started dating my current wife my freshman year of high school. And Kurt was a sophomore, and so I was conscientious. You know, I had things like deodorant and hair gel, and conditioner, you know, basic hair and skincare products in my high school locker. Kurt had 2 bars of Kramer Cheesic lye soap. That was it. The standard issue, you've all used them if you played athletics in Kansas, and they're, I mean, sandpaper's an upgrade for what these things are. But one day after football practice, he comes over kind of like he was going to buy drugs from me or something. He's like, "Hey, Daner, let me get some of that hair gel." And then he said, "Just for smell, just for smell." So, you know, needless to say, Kurt wasn't going to have any bubbly, lavender, whatever, hair gel. So I supplied him hair gel for the next 3 years, and he used it every day, and he'd say, "Just for smell." But the point is that from that day forward, anything could be just for smell. I mean, it could be putting a hat on, or a pair of pants, or pass the Tabasco, or give me some more peppers, or just barbecue on the ribs. Everything was just for smell. And then he had some ones that very few people knew what they meant, like this one, which is totally off the wall. And he just leaned back, usually after taking a bite of something to eat, and say, 73 before the rains. What in the world is this? So, oddly enough, my dad loved to watch Taxi, so I knew what this meant. But it was off an old Taxi episode where that crazy Jim, Christopher Lloyd, I think was his name or something like that. But for those of you who saw this episode, you'll never forget it. But there was a cookie baking contest they had at Taxi. And Latka, that guy, he made cookies. Well, he put coca leaves in his cookies. When Jim was a recovered drug addict, And he'd always log in, Jim's real dry. And everybody loved Latkes cookies, and they kept asking for more and more and more, and nobody knew what the deal was. Well, they were full of cocaine. And, Jim took a bite, and they asked, Jim, what do you think? And he was like, 73 before the rains in Colombia. This has no play on drugs or anything, but from that day forward, Kurt take a bite of a cookie or a brownie or anything. 73 before the rains. It ain't that bad. This one thing about Kurt, and it always amazed me because Lillian's probably the best cook west of Salina. I mean, maybe in Kansas, I don't know, but she can really, really cook. And I'm not talking about like tacos and fried chicken and mashed potatoes and things everybody makes. I mean, like, she'll make some kind of German casserole of 5 cheeses and different elbow noodles and hamburger and pulled pork. I don't even know what all she puts in this stuff, but...
Hey, Dane, correction, she is the best.
Okay, I knew somebody would say that, but it's true.
Thank God.
Absolutely amazing food in Dresden. And so Kurt grew up on that full ration, but Kurt would put anything in his mouth. It was food if he was hungry. I mean, really, some guys would take a little bit of dog food or a little treat or something as a joke. Kurt would eat anything. If he was hungry, he would eat things that, you'd never dream of putting in your mouth. Yeah, I mean, it didn't matter. And he liked it, too. It wasn't like he was just doing it to show off. I mean, he wouldn't just take one bite. He'd sit there and eat whatever it was. But he'd always, people would be standing around and like, Kurt, you're not really going to eat that, are you? And he's like, yeah, why wouldn't you? I'm hungry, And he'd eat some of it. And of course, everybody's watching. And he'd eat some and just kind of get that grin on his face and kind of like he was tasting it and clap his lips together. And he'd just look and say, it ain't that bad, really. So anything could not be that bad. Smooth as easy cheese. This was a good one. So Don Sulzman always fed his cats cheese. He said that they needed the extra protein, claiming that it was a necessary performance enhancement for the extra power required for his feline leaders to dominate their Dresden pride groups. Don's cats got cheese at some point or another, but only the top performing felines, these big toms, actually got easy cheese right out of the can. And it became a regular part of their training diets. Smooth as easy cheese became a common one-liner. It could be applied to just about anything. It went good. It was always something that went really well. It might have been a way to describe something that went over well, like an event, a game, a test, an interview, an inspection, getting out of a traffic ticket, patching up a quarrel, or great first date. It didn't matter. It was all smooth as easy cheese. This is a location joke, and I think a lot of people didn't know this one, and it's humiliating to tell it because Scott's probably going to still accuse me of lying even tonight. But this is the story of the kangaroo rat at Glen Elder Lake. So Scott and I and Kurt Scott's grandfather lived at Cocker City, and he was a tremendous duck hunter and fisherman. Scott didn't inherit any of those genetics, unfortunately. We're still working on him. But seriously, and he did, by the way, he's a great duck hunter. But we were fishing down there on the causeway like always, and we caught a whole bunch of fish. There's tremendous, we caught so many fish that you'd have to find a piece of driftwood and we'd put it on our arms and tie the stringers. And I mean, when you're hauling 80 pounds of white bass, half a mile back to the car, it was like that. It was like that every year. But what was funny about this story is I went back to where we had our stuff that day. It was in the afternoon, and there was a bag of, they never brought anything, so I kind of brought like little Debbie cakes, Snickers, and water jugs. They just had like a pocket full of jigs, and they'd go down there for 20 hours at a time. They had took nothing. And I always had all this stuff and food. And anyway, there was something in a bag of chips. And if you can imagine, outside the bag of chips, there was this tail, maybe 8-10 inches long. And on the end of it, there was a little tuft of hair on this thing. And I'd never seen anything like that. It was in there eating all these chips. And, you know, it came out and it hopped up the rocks and it disappeared. You can't make this stuff up. So I told them what I saw. And they laughed so hard, you know, they couldn't even fish. They were just, whatever, you know. Well, I was determined. I go home, this is long before the internet. This would have been probably 1989, 1990 time frame. And I look it up in the encyclopedia, and I find this picture, and there is such a thing as a kangaroo rat, and it's pretty rare in the Midwest, but we have them occasionally. And now I'm going to tell them, because officially I saw a kangaroo rat. Well, they physically went from, I don't remember where I was when I told them, but they were both together and they were leaning on something, and then Kurt ended up in the fetal position with his hands on top of his eyes. It's probably the hardest I've ever seen him laugh. And everybody was sober too. It was just that funny to them. But from that point forward, if something was completely unbelievable, I'd be talking to Kurt on the phone, and you know, somebody to do something like walk across the Grand Canyon on a high wire or something. He's like, "Did you see that?" I said, "No." And he says, "Well, it was pretty damn cool, but there's no freaking kangaroo rat." And that's just how he used it. And then, you know, and I don't know who came up with this. I'm sure this is like 3 or 4 generations old, but the one-liner was about like that. And I think it was a fishing thing originally, but it was a standard unit of measurement for Kurt. And there was a way you had to say it. You didn't just say about like that. You kind of had to lean back, put your hands out, and say, about like that. You know, and originally, you know, that was just talk about fish, but after that, it didn't really matter. If you could ask Kurt, like, "Hey, how big is that screw they put in your hip?" Or "How big's that fence you just built?" Or "How big's that steak you ate?" Or, you know, it didn't, everything was about like that. Cat talk. This is my personal favorite. Thanks. Cats were, you know, and this was definitely genetic. But cats were absolutely kings at Donald, and they probably still are. I didn't see one there today, but there were probably 20 of them locked up in the shed or something. But they were kings. And Don cared for these cats literally like they were royalty, and nothing was too good for the cats. But Don was really creative, and he had all these crazy one-liners about things he'd say to make his cats feel better. And the way that Don described his cats is something that Kurt really enjoyed, and a lot of times we'd have dinner there after going deer hunting or after a football game or whatever, and we'd sit down. You know, Kurt had heard them all 1,000 times before, and Don would sit there and talk to those cats, and Kurt would slowly roll off of the couch laughing. But cat talk had nothing to do with the words or even the one-liners. It was more of a way that you communicate than what you said. So really anything could be cat talk. And I would say, and I've made a note here, this unique form of communication was almost entirely retained by the Sulzman men only. And since I've all heard them cat talk, I can confirm that they're all professionals in this area. And it's contagious, and a lot of people have tried to do cat talk, and if you're not a Sulzman or a Trickin, you can't do cat talk. So I guess, even though it came from Don, it's a genetic thing from Lily. And I'm no good at it either, but I had to write a few things down. At the end of the day, cat talk was originated around a way to describe a superior particular male cat. So a few, and you could say these all night. Really, we just pass the mic around and say these, and it'd be a good night. But the first one that came to mind is, he's nothing short of a true legend. He may not look like it, but he has incredible power. Oh yeah, he runs the entire mob. This one here, he's a magnificent samurai. Without question, he's the absolute king of his domain. Oh, for sure, he could easily make the Olympics. He's a true killer and he likes it. His agility is absolutely unmatched. No one in town can touch him. He's a tremendous street fighter, one of the best ever. Those could show up anywhere. All of them and 1,000 more of those. But what about Kurt's perspective on human anatomy? This is a really good set here. I mean, you have to pay especially close attention to a conversation with Kurt about a body part, because there's a pretty good chance you're going to have no idea what he was talking about. So I'll just jump right in. A lid, that's your head. Flanges, which we all went through, Anatomy 101, he pronounced them flanges. Those are pretty much anything except your head or your torso. Could be a flange. A wheel was your leg, tire was your foot, a hinge or a bearing could be any joint, your wing was your shoulder, and somebody's lower unit was anything from about here down, just didn't matter. And, he had a lot of other cool terms, and, things like victuals. When he said victuals, it always meant food, but it may mean like I'm going to eat something right now, or I'm going to cook something, but that's what victuals meant. And motor oil, that was beer. A few jars meant at least a 12-pack. Coal was gasoline if you need coal. And warm dirt or copper schnozzle, that was Copenhagen. But Kurt's most interesting descriptions were of time and space and travel. These are what he described to let everybody know where he was going and when he was going to get there and the route he was going to take. And these were all one words. These weren't one-liners. These were just words. And some of those, there's a million of them, but a few were tootle, troll, slide, meander, and skedaddle. So, tootle was a general description of speed or duration to a destination pretty close by. Tootle typically meant that he's probably not in a big hurry, but wherever or whatever he's doing is pretty specific. He's going to tootle over there quick. Like, let's tootle over there real quick and check it out. Or it could be also an instruction, like, while you're coming over, why don't you tootle by there and grab me one too. You could tootle just about anywhere that wasn't a long trip or really time-consuming or a big destination. But trolling, on the other hand, far less specific than trolling, or tootling. It was also casual, though, but you generally would troll by or through somewhere on your way to a different destination. But unlike tootle, you could troll to locations far away. Like you could troll through Colorado on your way back home, or you could troll over to Manhattan for the football game. Hunting, fishing stuff. Hunting, fishing stuff was a one-line adjective that was used to describe anything you could do outside that was not an organized athletic event. Had nothing to do with hunting and fishing. Let's go hunting and fishing stuff. What do you mean? Well, it didn't really matter. We weren't going to go for football practice. That's about the only thing you knew was not going to happen. But as you listen to those, and I had written descriptions for all those, but I think that's too boring. But splendid, very well then, delicious, tremendous, smooth, and excellent. They're all positive. And that's just kind of how he was, you know. They had different interpretations, but they were all good. And the best one I saved for last, and it's another one that originated with Scott and Kurt, and maybe Scott actually invented it, I don't know. But we were at Norton Lake, and I had a girlfriend at the time, my wife. These guys didn't have one, and we were doing stuff on the weekends all the time. And that particular day, we were at Norton Lake, and they knew I had a date. And there were no, forget about cell phones, there weren't even phones anywhere we went, right? Because we were like out wherever, ponds, lake, pasture, creek, whatever. And I'm late. And Scott was, I think, what was the name, where is Scott?
President.
What was the name of that blue station wagon?
Safari.
The Safari. Perfect. We were in the Safari. I remember that. So we'd been fishing all day, and I was supposed to go to the movies with Missy that night. And it's getting dark, and Scott's driving, and you know we're on this end of the lake, and Hoxie's this way, and we go that way. And they're like, Scott's like, well, we're just gonna check out the dam real quick and make a few casts here, right by the parking lot. Okay, great. I'm screwed already, so I can deal with their 15 minutes. Well, an hour and a half later, they're halfway down Norton Dam, and I'm pissed. And I'm yelling, guys, we gotta go. And, I was gonna hot wire. Scott took his keys. I was just gonna leave them. And I'll never forget. And it had been going on. Like every 15 minutes, I'd yell. And they were laughing, they thought it was so funny. And Kurt would say, 5 more casts, Dave, 5 more casts. And it went over and over and over again. So, needless to say, and although I was late that night, I made it, she waited, and everything worked out, and things were good. But since that time, 5 more casts officially made the Sulzman Library of Terms, and I always laughed when I heard him say it, but just like all the other terms and one-liners, 5 more casts is also multi-purpose. But it was generally described, a way of describing a casual delay or a late departure, but it still represented official notification that I'm going to be late. So this is the heavy part, and this is what I think 5 more casts means today. It means I'm coming, I'm just not there yet. It means I'm not done yet, I just need a little more time. It means that while I may be joking, I won't forget any of you. It means any minute something really spectacular could happen. It means while you aren't going to get there on time, you will all get there in time. It means you should have a lot of fun along the way. It means don't get in a hurry. It means trust me. It means it's going to be worth the wait. And it most definitely means that I am coming and I will see you again there together. 5 more casts, Kurt. Thank you.